Great. So, hi everyone. My name is Jasmine Muszik. I'm a second year PhD student at McGill, and today I have the pleasure of talking to you about animal frustration in my presentation, Holy Cow, Just Let Me Go Outside. So, to start off with, what exactly is frustration? Because I'm sure we've all heard this term, and I'm sure we've used it to describe ourselves, but what does it really mean when we say, I'm frustrated? Well, first, frustration has to start with a motivation, so either a desire or a need for something. For example, you're hopefully motivated every morning to go to work on time. With that motivation comes anticipation. So you're expecting something to happen, maybe a reward, or maybe you expect something won't happen. So, for example, if you're going to work at the same time every day, you never hit traffic, so you expect to show up at the same time every day. However, where frustration comes into play is when you have the expectation and it's not met. So in this case, you run into some traffic, and of course, that makes you late for work, so you're really frustrated. So this is just to show the emotions that we can experience. It's not exhaustive, but I do want to say in the upper left-hand corner, you can see where frustration is. It is a highly negative and highly intense feeling. So what exactly does frustration look like in animals? Well, it is the same process. They have the motivation and anticipation, and if it's not met, that can lead to the frustration. However, of course, because their physiology is different than ours, they show it in different ways. So for example, in pigs, when they're frustrated, they perform an abnormal behavior called tail biting, where they actually chew on other animals' tails. So this can have a negative consequence, not just for the individual that's frustrated, but also for other animals in the herd. So we don't want to induce frustration in our animals because it can decrease their well-being. But how do we go about measuring or trying to understand frustration in animals? Well, the easiest, simplest, and most direct way is to study their behavior because it tells us exactly what they're feeling internally. And there's lots of different measures we can take, lots of different tests that we can do. For example, there's the unsolvable task where you train the animal to do a task in order to receive a reward. Then once they've learned how to do it, you actually make it impossible to do that task, and that induces frustration. And then you can measure what behaviors they do as a response. For example, with the dog here, you can see that they're trained to flip over the container to receive a treat. And once they've learned that, the container gets glued to the surface, so they physically can't push the container anymore. And then you can measure what behaviors they do. For my specific research, I wanted to look at dairy cows, not just because I love cows, but also because in Canada, it's very common to house our dairy cows inside the barn all year long. So now we're transitioning over into letting the cows go outside. And I wanted to understand how the frequency of going outside impacts their frustration response. So we had a 5-week trial with 36 cows that we split into two groups. The first group was our 3X group in red that got to go outside 3 times a week. And then we also had a 1X group in blue that got to go outside just once a week. And we cued them to understand there was a signal, and that signal meant it was time to go outside. And then once the target group had been brought outside, the animals that were left in the barn were recorded to see what kind of behaviors they did and for how long. So this is a graph here to show the duration of the behavior, so how long they were performing the behavior between the two different groups. Group in red performed frustrated behavior for longer than our 1X group. And for both groups overall, you can see that the frustration behavior decreased over time. So what can we take away from this? Well, I think for the first point, where we saw that the 3X group showed longer durations of frustration behavior, I think that this comes because the animals in this group were given the reward more often, their expectations were met more often, and as a result, they had higher expectation because they were often given what they wanted. So the one time a week where they were denied the opportunity to go outside, they had higher frustration because their expectations were also higher than the other group. Also, for the second point where we saw the frustration decrease over time, I think that's because the animals learn to compensate, because of course we don't want to have those negative feelings. And this is something that we do as humans. We try to compensate by lowering our expectations. So I think that's what happened as time went on. They started to lower their expectations so that they wouldn't have as highly negative feelings as a result. But the main thing that we know is that not allowing our cows to go outside does cause frustration, which of course we don't want them to experience. And I think even if we did this trial for a longer period of time, we would see that the frustration doesn't completely go away, just that it maybe levels out. So it's important not just to reduce frustration, but to allow the animals to have those pleasurable opportunities so that we can turn holy cow into happy cow. Thank you so much for listening. I welcome any questions during the Q&A period.